Over the past few years, a new genre of motorcycle has emerged. Sport heritage, retro sport, or neo sports cafe, whatever you call it, these companies are pulling styling cues from their history and putting it onto a modern platform that's on par with any of today's sport bikes. So we're out here with 3 bikes that define that genre. The Yamaha XSR900, the Kawasaki Z900RS Cafe, and the Honda CB1000R. We're in downtown Los Angeles to put these bikes through the motions of daily use and then head out of town for some canyon carving to see which of them most successfully blends classic styling with a modern platform. All right, we are now back in the studio after spending a couple days testing and riding some universal Japanese motorcycles. I'm here with executive editor Justin Dawes to go over what we thought of the bikes after spending a good amount of time testing them.
Yeah, it was a little bit different test than some of them that we do because we did a lot of city riding before we did some street riding up in the mountains and stuff. So it kind of like was a good mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And leading up to that test, we each had the bikes for a week or so to spend just in our daily lives, riding them around, commuting. But for these bikes, I thought it was important to test green light to red light, just being in the city, how they feel maneuvering through traffic at slow speeds, because for most owners, I think that that's going to be a real part of use.
Yeah, especially these bikes, you know, being the new UJM, you use them for multiple things. You want them as an everyday commuter, but also something you can go ride fast on the weekends and have some fun on. And, you know, I think it was a very valid way to start the test, and it definitely showed the colors of the bikes a little bit.
Yes, so certain things were very, very apparent. Let's get into it. First off, let's talk about the XSR. The XSR belongs in the city. It felt like it was fast and waiting to sort of bust out, but it also felt like it was meant to perform well in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice and light and it moves around easily. For most moving around the city bits, like the actual moving through spaces, it was really good.
Yeah.
But in a well-worn city like LA, there's a lot of potholes and bumps, and that part of the bike, I think it suffered a little bit in those places.
Yeah, it's soft suspension, so when you're cruising along straight, totally fine. For some mild canyon stuff, again, totally fine. But anything serious, any like serious brake application or serious potholes would upset the chassis.
Yeah. But on the other hand, the Honda, pretty good.
The Honda, it's just an incredibly neutral ride. I really liked that bike because it's just easy to ride. It's confidence inspiring. So in the city, it's smooth. I mean, I hate to say it, but it was a Civic, man. You're just cruising along.
Honda, you know, can be vanilla, but it's always vanilla in a good way.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you're ever disappointed that you get a vanilla milkshake. You're like, ooh, it's a vanilla milkshake. And that's what this thing is. And I really like that about the bike, being able to move through traffic. Just everything is like, it just works perfectly, so much so that you don't even think about it.
Exactly. It is smooth, it is consistent, it's not wild, it doesn't shock you or drop your jaw in any way. And so in the city, I enjoyed it. The seat is a little bit hard and the foot pegs are a little high up.
Yeah.
So you're in a pretty aggressive position for just normal city riding.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Even, I mean, you have much longer legs than I do. So for you, I mean, they would probably feel really high. For me, they felt a little bit higher than probably they could or should be, especially for around the town riding. But that's just ergonomics. The rest of the bike was great, but it did everything so well, or well enough that it was almost kind of forgettable. And like when you got off it, you just kind of forgot about it.
That was one thing that we did really see is when we parked the bikes to look at them and to eat lunch and sort of, you know, eavesdrop on people walking by and admiring them, nobody cared about the Honda. And to me, I think the Honda looks like if you gave a 2020 designer a picture of a CB750 and you said, modernize this. You know, it's very much Honda's classic design language translated to 2020, and it looks like a new bike, but it doesn't scratch the UJM itch because it's just not retro enough.
Yeah, it just doesn't have that curb presence that the other two have, and especially the Kawasaki. When everyone walks by the Kawasaki, they're just like, whoa, that thing is sick. What year is that? Like, they actually think you're riding a bike from the 80s that has been meticulously restored. And that's kind of the fun of the Kawasaki in town. You always get the looks. Everyone's always thinks it looks cool. And you do look cool on it. It's got a rad paint job. It's got a little fairing on it. It's just, it looks the part, but it also gets around town really nice. It's a little bit longer. It's a little bit softer, but not as soft as the Yamaha, but it just has this like big comfy seat and it just cruises through town. It's more of a cruiser in town than the Yamaha or even the Honda, but it has the most presence.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not really a slouch either. It was 1/100th of a second slower than the Yamaha in the 0 to 30, because the Yamaha will pick up.
Yeah,
but,
wheelie all the time.
But it's a great package. And as far as the nostalgic aspect, from the exhaust note to the, you know, tuck roll sort of pleated seat that they have, to that bikini fairing and the paint job, it really checks the boxes, and you do have that, you know, emotionally evocative, you know, nostalgic
you can connect with it in a way visually when you're kind of spending your days in town just having to ride it for transportation or something like that. You're like, I get to ride this thing, it looks cool.
Yeah.
And then when you go out of town,
it's really fun to ride.
It works.
Yeah. The Yamaha, people, as they would look at it, it was always, is it fast? Does it wheelie? It wasn't really evocative of old bikes. It was more, that looks like a fast sport bike, which it is. It's basically a reskinned MT-09.
Yeah, basically. I mean, you get all the MT-09 goodness with a little bit more style.
In a stylish package, right, which can't complain.
Yeah, can't complain. Right. It's a good bike. And it's the least expensive.
And yeah, it's $9,500, which is more than $2,000 less than the Kawi, and the Honda comes in at 13. So it's significantly cheaper than the other two. The Honda really blew the other bikes away in the dyno chart and in the performance testing.
Yeah.
But when we're out in the real world, it did not feel like the fastest of the three bikes.
No, it didn't. The other two bikes seem to have a little more punch down low.
Yeah.
The Honda had more rev. So in town, obviously, the other two felt much faster because they get off the line kind of harder and they had more torque. On the other side, up in the hills, you could get into that power, and then you're like, oh, here's where the power is.
Yep.
It's just up higher. But at the same time, it's buttery smooth everywhere.
Yeah, the Honda's peak torque comes on at 8,100 revs, whereas the Kawi's comes on at 6,000. So around town, it's a lot more usable in the lower range.
Definitely.
You know, you find yourself just really staying in that sweet spot. And then when you get out of town, the Honda will take on more of a sport bike personality, you know, as you keep it in those higher revs.
For sure. But engine-wise, they all have a really, I would say, character that is unique to each of them. Like the XSR is rowdy, the feeling is twitchy, it's snappy, it's just kind of like a little bit like frantic, frenetic.
Yeah.
The Honda, it's refined, it's smooth,
Yep.
and you see that in the styling. But then the engine itself is the same way. It's just a nice engine package that makes really good power, but it doesn't like make you go, oh my gosh, in any way, really. Other than you go, yeah, it's good. And then the Kawasaki, it behaves like you would expect it to, by the way it looks. It's just kind of like torquey and muscly, and it's like a muscle car almost in a way.
And that's something that Kawasaki refined since launch. When that bike first launched, it did have that same really aggressive mapping that would just, you know, peak up right in the beginning, and they've smoothed that out, and so power delivery is really nice. And now,
really nice and
now you have this very controllable, very consistent application, and so it does lead to a much more connected feel on the bike.
Yeah, and as much as I love the CP3 engine, I still give the Kawasaki the thumbs up in overall engine character.
The Yamaha engine is incredible, but as we were saying when we were out there testing, switching to the bike's lowest performing mode shouldn't be almost required to keep the thing behaving.
Exactly.
And acting
You
nice.
do it in A or standard. It's real herky-jerky on the fueling. And I mean, we've talked about this for how many years about that motor and that platform, whether it be the XSR or the MT-09 or even the FJ or whatever, the Tracer, there's just this weird feeling mixed with, I think, a little bit of driveline lash that just gives it a real herky-jerky character and it's really unsettling when you're in a corner trying to make fine throttle movements and it goes.
Well, it's also the stiction of that front fork.
Yeah,
where from both throttle application and brake application, you get a lot of initial bite on that brake. So you have that little bit of stiction on that fork in order to get it to move first. So when it does, it sort of jerks you.
And then it's soft, so then the weight transfer, once it breaks the stiction, it dives kind of forward a little bit hard. And that might be a thing, is if it had stiffer suspension, we might not be talking as much about the fueling and the on-off jerking.
Because you're feeling more than just the lateral motion of the engine, you are feeling the
weight transfer back and forth, and you don't want weight transfer back and forth mid-corner. And then you have the Kawasaki, it feels really long and really stable. And when you put that in a corner, it's just like,
it's just solid.
I'm here.
It is planted.
I mean, it takes more effort to move it in any direction you want to move it.
And it's just a little...
Once it's there, it's so easy.
Yeah, and it's just a little over an inch longer in the wheelbase than the Yamaha, but it feels much more stable.
Yeah.
It really actually takes effort to wheelie rather than the Yamaha, which you take off too quick and that wheel is up every time.
Yeah, you say, whoa, and it wheelies, where the Kawasaki, you really have to, give it some effort. And then the Honda, once again, very composed in the corners and stuff, but it almost feels a little too stiff in the corners. Like it doesn't settle into a corner like the Kawasaki does. Like Kawasaki, go into the corner, it's long, it's low, it settles. The Honda, you're up high, and it's kind of like...
Gives you a lot of feedback.
I'm cornering. What do you want to do now? What do you want to do now? But not in a way like XSR does, where it's twitchy. It just is like ready to do what you want it to do. But it feels just really taut, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you do get a lot of feedback. It doesn't smooth the ride out for you. And that's where, it does sort of take on that sport bike personality where you're in it. You're seeing the other side of the bike.
Yeah, then that's when those high foot pegs come into play. So in the end, the Yamaha, great bike, but it has some flaws, obviously. Mainly the suspension and the snatchiness of the throttle just kind of made it so it just couldn't win this thing.
Yeah, it's a really fun bike. It's great in city, it's great on mountain roads, but to live with daily, to commute for longer rides, it just got a little bit too much character.
For me, that's what it is.
And the Honda was sort of the opposite. It was very neutral ride for the most part. It's a natural evolution for Honda, but it's not retro. It's not styly for styly's sake, and I like that because it's not pretentious, but also it just doesn't evoke the classic motorcycles that this shootout's about.
With Honda coming out with the Monkey and the Trail 125 and all these bikes that really do nail it on the kind of retro, the CB could have used that. So overall, it's just a really good bike, but it's not the one that I found myself gravitating towards at any one point during the test.
And that one was the Kawasaki. The Z900RS Cafe, great plush suspension, a really comfortable ergonomic package. The styling obviously is incredible. The exhaust note is just great.
It just kind of nails like everything. It just checks every box for what you want out of a UJM. And that's where it's at.
And that's it. The hour commute home that night, the canyon ride, city ripping. At the end of the day, there's one set of keys that we were all looking at, and it was the Kawasaki, which is always a really good indicator of which is the clear winner, which here was the Kawasaki Z900RS Cafe. So thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and follow along as we make more videos for you.
See ya.